Chapter 25. The very saintly Ashiata Shiemash, sent from above to the earth. And so, my boy, now listen very attentively to the information concerning the most very saintly, now already common cosmic individual, Ashiata Shiemash, and his activities connected with the existence of the free-brain beings arising and existing on that planet Earth which has taken your fancy. I have already more than once told you that by the almost gracious command of our omni-loving common Father Endlessness, our cosmic, highest, most very saintly individuals sometimes actualize within the presence of some terrestrial, free-brain being, a definitized conception of a sacred individual in order that he, having become a terrestrial being with such a presence, may there on the spot orientate himself and give to the process of their ordinary being existence such a corresponding new direction, thanks to which the already crystallized consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, as well as the predispositions to such new crystallizations, might perhaps be removed from their presences. It was 7 centuries before the Babylonian events I've spoken of that there was actualized in the planetary body of a free brain being there a definitized conception of a sacred individual named Ashiata Shiemash, who became there in his turn a messenger from above, and who is now already one of the highest, most very saintly common cosmic sacred individuals. Ashiata Shirmash had his conception in the planetary body of a boy of a poor family descended from what is called the Sumerian race, in a small place then called Pispaskania, situated not far from Babylon. He grew up and became a responsible being partly in this small place and partly in Babylon itself, which was at that time, although not yet magnificent, already a famous city. The very saintly Ashiata Shirmash was the only messenger sent from above to your planet who succeeded by his holy labours in creating on that planet conditions in which the existence of its unfortunate beings somewhat resembled for a certain time the existence of the free-brain beings of the other planets of our great universe, on which beings exist with the same possibilities. And he was also the first on that planet Earth who, for the mission pre-assigned to him, refused to employ for the free-brain beings of that planet the ordinary methods which had been established during centuries by all the other messengers from above. The very saintly Ashiata Shirmash taught nothing whatever to the ordinary free-brain beings of the earth, nor did he preach anything to them, as was done before and after him by all the messengers sent there from above with the same aim. And in consequence chiefly of this, none of his teachings passed in any form from his contemporaries even to the 3rd generation of ordinary beings there, not to mention the contemporary ordinary beings there. Definite information relating to his very saintly activities passed from generation to generation from the contemporaries of the very saintly Ashiata Shirmash to the beings of the following generations through those called their initiates, by means of a certain what is called legomanism, of his deliberations under the title of the terror of the situation. In addition to this, there has survived from the period of his very saintly activities, and there still exists even till now, one of several what are called marble tablets, on which were engraved his counsels and commandments and sayings to the beings contemporary with him. And at the present time this surviving tablet is the chief sacred relic of a small group of initiated beings there, called the Brotherhood Olbogmek, whose place of existence is situated in the middle of the continent Asia. The name Olbogmek means there are not different religions, there is only one God. When I was personally on the surface of your planet for the last time, I happened by chance to become acquainted with the legomanism, which transmits to the initiated men beings of the planet Earth of remote generations these deliberations of the saintly Ashiata Shiemash under the title of The Terror of the Situation. The legomanism was of great assistance to me in elucidating certain strange aspects of the psyche of these peculiar beings, just as those strange aspects of their psyche which, with all my careful observations of them during tens of centuries, I had previously been unable to understand in any way whatsoever. "My dear and beloved grandfather, tell me please, what does the word legomanism mean?" Hassan asked. "This word legomanism," replied Beelzebub, "is given to one of the means existing there of transmitting from generation to generation information about certain events of long past ages, through just those free-brained beings who are thought worthy to be and who are called initiates. This means of transmitting information from generation to generation had been devised by the beings of the continent Atlantis. For your better understanding of the said means of transmitting information to beings of succeeding generations by means of a legomanism, I must here explain to you a little also about those beings there whom other beings called and call initiates. In former times there on the planet Earth, this word was always used in one sense only, and the free-brained beings there who were called initiates were those who had acquired in their presences almost equal objective data which could be sensed by other beings. But during the last 2 centuries this word has come to be used there now in 2 senses. In one sense it is used for the same purpose as before, that is to say, those beings there are so named who became initiates thanks to their personal conscious labours and intentional sufferings, and thereby, as I have already told you, they acquire in themselves objective merits which can be sensed by other beings irrespective of brain system, and which also evoke in others trust and respect. In the other sense, those beings call each other by this name who belong to those what are called their criminal gangs, which in the said period have greatly multiplied there, and whose members have as their chief aim to steal from those around them only essence values. Under the pretence of following supernatural or mystic sciences, these criminal gangs there are really occupied, and very successfully, with this kind of plunder. And so any and every genuine member of such a gang there is called an initiate. There are even great initiates among these terrestrial initiates, and these great initiates, especially at the present time, are made out of those ordinary initiates of new formation, who in their virtuoso affairs pass, as is said there, through fire, water, copper pipes, and even through all the roulette halls of Monte Carlo. Well then, my boy, legomanism is the name given in the successive transmission of information about long past events which have occurred on the planet Earth from initiate to initiates of the first kind. This is from really meritorious beings who have themselves received their information from similar meritorious beings. For having invented this means of transmitting information, we must give the beings of the continent Atlantis their due. This means was indeed very wise and did indeed attain their aim. This is the sole means by which information about certain events that proceeded in times long past has accurately reached the beings of remote later generations. As for the information which passed from generation to generation through the ordinary mass of beings of that planet, it has either completely disappeared, having been soon forgotten, or there remains of it, as our dear Mullah Nasir ad-Din expresses it, only the towel and mane and food for Scheherazade. Hence it is that when a few scraps of information about some event or other do happen to reach the beings of remote later generations, and the learned beings of new formation there concoct their hotchpotch out of these scraps, there then occurs a most peculiar and most instructive phenomenon, namely, when the cockroaches there chance to hear what is in this hotchpotch, the evil spirit of Saint Vetus existing there immediately enters their common presences and begins to rage quite merrily. How the contemporary learned beings of the planet Earth concoct their hotpotch from scraps of information which reach them is very well defined in one of the wise sentences of our dear Mullah Nasir ad-Din, which consists of the following words: "A flea exists in the world just for one thing, that when it sneezes, that deluge should occur with the description of which our learned beings love so much to busy themselves." I must tell you that when I used to exist among your favourites, it was always difficult for me to refrain, as your favourites say, from laughter when one or another of the learned beings there delivered a lecture or related to me personally about some past events, of which I had myself been an eyewitness. These lectures or stories there are crammed with fictions so absurd that even if our arch-cunning Lucifer or his assistants tried to invent them, they could not succeed. Chapter 26. The legomanism concerning the deliberations of the very saintly Ashiata Shiemash, under the title of The Terror of the Situation. The legomanism, Beelzebub continued to speak, through which the deliberations of the very saintly Ashiata Shirmash were transmitted, had the following contents. It began with the prayer: "In the name of the causes of my arising, I should always strive to be just towards every already spiritualized origination and towards all the originations of the future spiritualized manifestations of our common Creator, Almighty, Autocrat, Endlessness. Amen." To me, a trifling particle of the whole of the great whole, it was commanded from above to be coated with the planetary body of a free-centred being of this planet, and to assist all other such beings arising and existing upon it to free themselves from the consequences of the properties of that organ which, for great and important reasons, was actualized in the presences of their ancestors. All the sacred individuals here before me, specially and intentionally actualized from above, have always endeavoured, while striving for the same aim, to accomplish the task laid upon them through one or other of those free sacred ways for self-perfecting, foreordained by our endless Creator himself, namely through the sacred ways based on the being impulses called faith, hope, and love. When I completed my 17th year, I began, as commanded from above, to prepare my planetary body in order, during my responsible existence, to be able to be impartial. At this period of my self-preparation, I had the intention, upon reaching responsible age, of carrying out the task laid upon me, through one or other of the said free sacred being impulses also. But when, during this period of my self-preparation, I chanced to meet many beings of almost all types, formed and existing here in the city of Babylon, and when, during my impartial observations, I constated many traits of their being manifestations, there crept into me and progressively increased an essence doubt as to the possibilities of saving the free-centred beings of this planet by means of these free sacred ways. The different manifestations of the beings I then encountered, which increased my doubts, gradually convinced me that these consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, having passed by heredity through a series of generations over a very long period of time, had ultimately so crystallized in their presences that they now reach contemporary beings already as a lawful part of their essence, and hence these crystallized consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer are now, as it were, a second nature of their common presences. So when I finally became a responsible being, I decided that before making my choice among the mentioned sacred ways, I would bring my planetary body into the state of the sacred Kesher Kanara, that is, into the state of all-brained balanced being perceptiveness, and only when already in that state to choose the way for my further activities. With this aim, I then ascended the mountain Vezinim Arma, where for 40 days and nights I knelt on my knees and devoted myself to concentration. A second 40 days and nights I neither ate nor drank, but recalled and analysed all the impressions present in me of all the perceptions I'd acquired during my existence here, during the period of my self-preparation. A third 40 days and nights I knelt on my knees, and also neither ate nor drank, and every half hour I plucked 2 hairs from my breast. And only when, thereafter, I had finally attained complete freedom from all the bodily and spiritual associations of the impressions of ordinary life, I began to meditate how to be. These meditations of my purified reason then made it categorically clear to me that to save the contemporary beings by any of the sacred ways was already too late. These meditations of mine made it categorically clear to me that all the genuine functions proper to man being as they are, proper to all the free-centred beings of our great universe, had already degenerated in their remote ancestors into other functions, namely into functions included among the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, which were very similar to the genuine sacred being functions of faith, love and hope. And this degeneration occurred, in all probability, in consequence of the fact that when the organ Kundabuffer had been destroyed in these ancestors, and they had also acquired in themselves factors for the genuine sacred being impulses then, as the taste of many of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer still remained in them. These properties of the organ Kundabuffer, which resembled these free sacred impulses, became gradually mixed with the latter, with the result that there were crystallized in their psyche the factors for the impulses, faith, love and hope, which although similar to the genuine, were nevertheless somehow or other quite distinct. The contemporary free-centred beings here do at times believe, love and hope with their reason, as well as with their feelings, but how they believe, how they love and how they hope, it is exactly in this that all the peculiarity of these free being properties lies. They also believe, but this sacred impulse in them does not function independently, as it does in general in all the free-centred beings existing on the various other planets of our great universe, upon which beings with the same possibilities breed, but it arises dependent upon some or other factors, which have been formed in their common presences, owing as always to the same consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, as for instance, the particular properties arising in them which they call vanity, self-love, pride, self-conceit, and so forth. In consequence of this, the free-brained beings here are, for the most part, subject just to the perceptions and fixations in their presences of all sorts of synchropusarams, or, as it is expressed here, they believe any old tale. It is perfectly easy to convince beings of this planet of anything you like, provided only during their perceptions of these fictions there is evoked in them and there proceeds, either consciously from without or automatically by itself, the functioning of one or another corresponding consequence of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, crystallized in them from among those that form what is called the subjectivity of the given being, as for instance, self-love, vanity, pride, swagger, imagination, bragging, arrogance, and so on. From the influence of such actions upon their degenerated reason, and on the degenerated factors in their localizations, which factors actualize their being sensations, not only is there crystallized a false conviction concerning the mentioned fictions, but thereafter, in all sincerity and faith, they will even vehemently prove to those around them that it is just so and can in no way be otherwise. In an equally abnormal form were data moulded in them for evoking the sacred impulse of love. In the presences of the beings of contemporary times there also arises and is present in them as much as you please of that strange impulse which they call love. But this love of theirs is firstly also the result of certain crystallized consequences of the property of the same kunda buffer. And secondly, this impulse of theirs arises and manifests itself in the process of every one of them entirely subjectively, so subjectively and so differently that if 10 of them were asked to explain how they sense this inner impulse of theirs, then all 10 of them, if of course they for once replied sincerely and frankly confessed their genuine sensations, and not those they had read about somewhere or had obtained from somebody else, all 10 would reply differently and describe 10 different sensations. One would explain this sensation in the sexual sense, another in the sense of pity, a third in the sense of desire for submission, a fourth in a common craze for outer things, and so on and so forth. But not one of the 10 could describe even remotely the sensation of genuine love. And none of them would, because in none of the ordinary beings, men, here has there ever been, for a long time, any sensation of the sacred being impulse of genuine love. And without this taste, they cannot even vaguely describe that most beatific, sacred being impulse in the presence of every free-centered being of the whole universe, which, in accordance with the divine foresight of great nature, forms those data in us, from the result of the experiencings of which we can blissfully rest from the meritorious labours actualized by us for the purpose of self-perfection. Here, in these times, if one of those free-brained beings loves somebody or other, then he loves him either because the latter always encourages and undeservingly flatters him, or because his nose is much like the nose of that female or male with whom, thanks to the cosmic law of polarity, or type, a relation has been established which has not yet been broken. Or finally, he loves him only because the latter's uncle is in a big way of business and may one day give him a boost, and so on and so forth. But never do beings men here love with genuine, impartial and non-egoistic love. Thanks to this kind of love in the contemporary beings here, their hereditary predispositions to the crystallizations of the consequences of the properties of the organ kunda buffer are crystallized at the present time without hindrance, and finally become fixed in their nature as a lawful part of them. And as regards the third sacred being impulse, namely essence hope, its plight in the presences of the free-centered beings here is even worse than with the first two. Such a being impulse has not only finally adapted itself in them to the whole of their presences in a distorted form, but this maleficent, strange hope, newly formed in them, which has taken the place of the being impulse of sacred hope, is now already the principal reason why factors can no longer be acquired in them for the functioning of the genuine being impulse of faith, love and hope. In consequence of this newly formed abnormal hope of theirs, they always hope in something, and thereby all those possibilities are constantly being paralysed in them, which arise in them either intentionally from without or accidentally by themselves, which possibilities could perhaps still destroy in their presences their hereditary predispositions to the crystallizations of the consequences of the properties of the organ kunda buffer. When I returned from the mountain Vezin-i-Ama to the city of Babylon, I continued my observations in order to make it clear whether it was not possible somehow or other to help these unfortunates in some other way. During the period of my year of special observations on all of their manifestations and perceptions, I made it categorically clear to myself that although the factors for engendering in their presence the sacred being impulses of faith, hope and love are already quite degenerated in the beings of this planet, nevertheless, the factor which ought to engender that being impulse on which the whole psyche of beings of a free brain system is in general based, and which impulse exists under the name of objective conscience, is not yet atrophied in them, but remains in their presences almost in its primordial state. Thanks to the abnormally established conditions of external ordinary being existence existing here, this factor has gradually penetrated and become embedded in that consciousness, which is here called subconsciousness. in consequence of which it takes no part whatever in the functioning of their ordinary consciousness. Well then, it was just then that I indubitably understood, with all the separate ruminating parts representing the whole of my I, that if the functioning of that being factor still surviving in their common presences were to participate in the general functioning of that consciousness of theirs, in which they pass their daily, as they here say, waking existence, only then would it still be possible to save the contemporary free-brain beings here from the consequences of the properties of that organ which was intentionally implanted into their first ancestors. My first meditations then confirmed for me that it would be possible to attain this only if their general being existence were to flow for a long time under foreseeingly corresponding conditions. When all the above mentioned was completely transubstantiated in me, I decided to consecrate the whole of myself from that time on to the creation here of such conditions that the functioning of the sacred conscience, still surviving in their subconsciousness, might gradually pass into the functioning of their ordinary consciousness. May the blessings of our almighty, omni-loving, common Father, union being, creator endlessness, be upon my decision. Amen. Thus ended the legomanism concerning the deliberations of the very saintly, incomparable Ashiata Shiemash, under the title of The Terror of the Situation. So, my boy, when, as I've already told you, early in my last descent in person onto the surface of your planet, I first became acquainted in detail with this legomanism, which I have just repeated, and had at once become interested in the deductions of this later, most high, very saintly, common cosmic individual Ashiata Shirmash, there existed neither any other legomanisms nor any other sources of information concerning his further, very saintly activities among those favourites of yours. So I then decided to investigate in detail and without fail to make clear to myself which were the measures he took and how he subsequently actualised them, in order to help these unfortunates to deliver themselves from the consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, which had passed to them by heredity and was so maleficent for them. And so, as one of my chief tasks during this last sojourn of mine in person there, on the surface of your planet, I made a detailed investigation and elucidation of the whole of the further, very saintly activities there among your favourites, of that great, essence-loving, now most high, very saintly, common cosmic individual, Ashiata Shiemash. And as regards that marble tablet which has by chance survived since the time of the very saintly activities of the great Ashiata Shirmash, and is now there the principal sacred relic of the brotherhood of the initiated beings called the Brotherhood Ol Begobmek, I happened to see and read the contents engraved on it during this last sojourn of mine there. During my subsequent elucidations it turned out that later on, when this very saintly Ashiata Shirmash had established there the particular conditions of ordinary being existence which he had planned, several of these tablets were, on his advice and initiative, set up in corresponding places of many of the large towns, and there were engraved upon them all kinds of sayings and counsels for corresponding existence. But when their big wars later on again began, all these tablets were also destroyed by these strange beings themselves, and only one of them, namely that one now with these brethren, however survived, as I've already told you, and is now the property of this brotherhood. On this still surviving marble were inscriptions concerning the sacred being impulses called faith, love and hope, namely, faith, love and hope. Faith of consciousness is freedom, faith of feeling is weakness, faith of body is stupidity. Love of consciousness evokes the same in response. Love of feeling evokes the opposite. Love of body depends only on type and polarity. Hope of consciousness is strength, hope of feeling is slavery, hope of body is disease. Before continuing to tell you more about the activities of the very saintly Ashiata Shiemash for the welfare of your favourites, I must, I think, elucidate to you a little more in detail that inner impulse which is called there by your favourites hope, and concerning which the very saintly Ashiata Shirmash constated that the case is worse than the other two. And the personal observations and investigations I later specially made regarding this said strange impulse present in them clearly showed me that in truth the factors for engendering this abnormal impulse in their presences are most maleficent for them themselves. Thanks to this abnormal hope of theirs, a very singular and most strange disease, with a property of evolving, arose and exists among them even until now, a disease called there tomorrow. This strange disease, tomorrow, brought with it terrifying consequences, and particularly for those unfortunate free-brain beings there who chance to learn and to become categorically convinced with the whole of their presence that they possess some very undesirable consequences for the deliverance from which they must make certain efforts, and which efforts moreover they even know just how to make, but owing to this maleficent disease, tomorrow, they never succeed in making these required efforts. And this is just the maleficent part of all that great terrifying evil which, owing to various causes great and small, is concentrated in the process of the ordinary being existence of these pitiable free-brain beings. And by putting off from tomorrow till tomorrow, those unfortunate beings there who do by chance learn all about what I have mentioned, are also deprived of the possibility of ever attaining anything real. This strange and for your favourites maleficent disease, tomorrow, has already become a hindrance for the beings of contemporary times, not only because they have been totally deprived of all possibilities of removing from their presences the crystallised consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, but it had also become a hindrance to most of them in honestly discharging at least those being obligations of theirs which have become quite indispensable in the already established conditions of ordinary being existence. Thanks to the disease tomorrow, the free-brain beings there, particularly the contemporary ones, almost always put off till later everything that needs to be done at the moment, being convinced that later they will do better and more. Owing to the said maleficent disease tomorrow, most of those unfortunate beings there who accidentally or owing to a conscious influence from without become aware through their reason in them of their complete nullity and begin to sense with all their separate spiritualized parts, and who also chance to learn which and in what way being efforts must be made in order to become such as it is proper for free-brained beings to be. Also by putting off from tomorrow till tomorrow, almost all arrive at the point that on one sorrowful day for themselves, there arise in them and begin to be manifest those forerunners of old age called feebleness and infirmity, which are the inevitable lot of all cosmic formations great and small toward the end of their completed existence. Here I must without fail tell you also about that strange phenomenon which I constated there during my observation and studies of the almost entirely degenerated presences of those favourites of yours. Namely, I definitely constated that in many of them, toward the end of their planetary existence, most of the consequences of the properties of that same organ which had been crystallised in their common presences began to atrophy of their own accord, and some of them even entirely disappear, in consequence of which these beings begin to see and sense reality a little better. In such cases, a strong desire appears in the common presences of such favourites of yours to work upon themselves, to work, as they say, for the salvation of their soul. But needless to say, nothing can result from such desires of theirs just because it is already too late for them. The time given them for this purpose by great nature having already passed, and although they see and feel the necessity of actualising the required being efforts, yet for the fulfilment of such desires of theirs, they have now only ineffectual yearnings and the lawful infirmities of old age. And so, my boy, researches and investigations concerning the further activities of the very saintly Ashiata Shiemash for the welfare of the free-brained beings arising and existing on this planet of yours eventually made the following clear to me. When this great and, by his reason, almost incomparable sacred individual became fully convinced that the ordinary sacred ways which exist for the purpose of self-perfection for all the free-brained beings of the universe were no longer suitable for the beings of this planet, he then, after his year of special observation and studies of their psyche, again ascended to that same mountain Vezinyama, and during several terrestrial months contemplatively pondered in which way he could actualize his decision. That is to save the beings of this planet from these hereditary predispositions to the crystallizations of the consequences of the properties of the organ kunda buffer, by means of those data which survived in their subconsciousness for the fundamental sacred being impulse, conscience. These ponderings of his, then, first of all, fully convinced him that though it were indeed possible to save them by means of the data which survived in their common presences for engendering this sacred being impulse, nevertheless it would only be possible if the manifestations of these data which survived in their subconsciousness were to participate without fail in the functioning of that consciousness of theirs, under the direction of which their daily waking existence flows, and furthermore, if this being impulse were to be manifested over a long period through every aspect of this consciousness of theirs.